for people who don't know who you are, just can you give us like a background on how you got into journalism and what happened with you being involved in that Johns Hopkins psychedelic study?
Yeah. I was living in Baltimore, and I was living in Baltimore, and my background is in engineering, so I was actually working at a local hospital, installing and repairing medical equipment, and I got into journalism because a friend of mine, Baynard Woods, he was an editor at the Baltimore City paper, which is like an alt weekly. I'm guessing your audience knows what an alt weekly. Before the internet, all over the country, you'd have like the Tampa City paper, the Philadelphia City paper, the Baltimore City paper. And alt weeklies were a place to where non-credentialed journalists could write about the local scene, local bands and all of this, like the Village Voice is kind of the prototype.
Right.
So the Baltimore City paper is like legendary alt weekly. I met Baynard Woods, and he said, "Hey, I've been writing this column on country and bluegrass music, but they gave me a bunch of other work. Do you want to do it?" I was not a writer at all. In fact, I was making films at the time. And I said, "You know what, to hell with it. I love country and bluegrass." And I thought, why not? I'll try it. He thought I was a writer, I think. Okay. And I didn't say anything. So I was like, you know what, I'll try it. And if it sucks, they'll just fire me.
Yeah.
So I started doing that. And then every now and then they would send me a different assignment, go to the museum and write this up, or go to a concert and write the concert up, or interview this person. And so I started being like, man, this is fun. Compared to film, where you need a lot of money and 4 or 5 different people and all kinds of equipment, you need a pencil and a piece of paper or an iPhone, and you're ready to go. So I happen to live in Highlandtown in East Baltimore, and Bayview Hospital is the site of the Johns Hopkins Psychedelic Research Center. And so they advertised in the Baltimore City paper. And so there was like a novelty aspect when you write an article. You want to see your byline. To me, it was like, cool, I wrote an article. Look, my name's in the paper. So I was down in Fells Point at Bertha's Mussels with my friend Bernard, who was the bartender down there for years and years. And I was flipping through the paper looking for an article I wrote, and I passed a page, and it said, "Have you done psychedelic drugs? We will pay you to participate in a study looking into the effects of hallucinogens on mood and behavior," something like that. And so I immediately called. And I was thinking, the bureaucracy of Hopkins, will they ever get back, or will it happen? But somebody actually picked up. And he said, "Yeah, why don't you come up here next week and we'll talk?" And so I was like, okay. So I went up there, and they did they do a physical, they give you a drug test, and then they do essentially talk therapy before they let you know. They want to know about your background. They don't want somebody in a psychedelic study who has a history of mental illness. They don't want somebody who's a drug addict. A lot of the studies they want people who are naive, meaning you've never taken a psychedelic drug. This study was the first one they had done to where they specifically wanted people with experience. And I'd already taken LSD, psilocybin, many other psychedelics. And so I got into the study, and that's how I had already been interested in psychedelics for a long time. Terrence, standard stuff. Terrence McKenna, John C. Lilly, Timothy Leary, Robert Anton Wilson, just the standard stuff that you can buy at a New Age bookstore. That was my experience with psychedelics.
How old were you at the time?
I was probably 25.
You were 25.
Yeah. Well, when I finally entered the study, I probably was maybe 28.
Oh, really? It took 3 years for the time you saw it?
No. What I'm saying is, let's do the math. It was in 2014, so I was 29 or 30.
Okay.
When I did the study.
And what was it like when you applied for it and they brought you in, and like what was the process of being introduced into this? Yeah,
well, okay, so like I said, they interview you and make sure that you're a good fit, and they say, okay, this is a guy we can have. These things are heavily screened, right? You can't be over 50. They want a particular kind of person because they want a particular kind of result, right? So this study there was a whole list of psychedelics. They didn't say this is going to be psilocybin. They said it could be psilocybin, it could be LSD, it could be ketamine, it could be DXM, it could be any of these things because it's double blind. And so that was the onboarding process. And then they just tell you, show up I did it every Friday. You pick a day of the week. They run studies Monday through Friday. And they said, you're going to start every Friday at 8 a.m. until it's over. And I think there were 6 sessions, and you're going to get 1 placebo. And so I started one Friday. You show up at 8 a.m. There's very strict instructions. You can have like a banana for breakfast, but you can't go out to Denny's and get a Grand Slam or Uncle Herschel's at Cracker Barrel. They want your stomach mainly empty so that the drug takes effect very quickly. If not, you may get there and then at 3 p.m. they're like, what, you're still tripping. They're trying to. It's hard to do because, as you well know, it's hard to fit a psychedelic trip inside of strict lines of a business day. Like, well, you know, it's wrapped up, kill the trip, you know. And so sometimes, you know, one time I can tell you about, they had to kind of help me out of there because this was high doses of psychedelics. So one Friday, 8 a.m., I ate my banana, and I lived so close I walked up to Bayview Research Center. Now, some people out there, Johns Hopkins School of Medicine is the most prestigious medical institution in the country. The main, and it's a university. So downtown Baltimore, you've got the Homewood campus. And then by my house in East Baltimore, which is actually Greektown, which is ironic considering the context here. But Bayview Hospital has the National Institutes of Drug Abuse. They have the Joseph V. Brady Behavioral Biology Center, which is where we were at. Because remember, these are, people get confused. They think these are studies in drugs. They're not chopping up mushrooms and looking at them and putting under microscopes. They're studying religion, and they're studying human behavior. They're interested in the intersection of religion and human behavior. That's what the studies are looking at. They're looking into religious experience and mystical experience, though it's sold as a study looking into the effects of drugs. Okay.
Was there a point, like at what point did you start to question the drive behind the study and the intention behind the study?
Well, I got out of the study, and like most people, you know, I had 5 very powerful experiences. Though I had done psychedelics before, I never had anything remotely close to what I would call a mystical, spiritual, or religious experience. Taking drugs in one of these studies with a particular playlist, blindfold,
music
playlist that's intended to drive a particular type of experience. They're trying to cultivate a very particular kind of experience. They're not going to let you pick the playlist or just hang out and take drugs. It's not like going to Grateful Dead. So they are masters at inducing a particular kind of experience that they believe is therapeutic, and then studying the effects of the drugs. So when did I begin to question the aim of the study?
Yeah, and first of all, how long did you do? You did it for how long?
Well, it lasted several months because after one particularly powerful trip, it had weird effects on me. And Roland Griffiths said, let's wait a couple of weeks. And normally you do 5 in a row, 5 Fridays in a row. I ended up skipping a couple because of what happened in one session that was DXM.
What happened?
DXM is the active ingredient in Robitussin. And when I used to live in San Diego with a bunch of Navy guys, my brother was in the Navy, and they would do what's called robo-tripping. You just drink a bunch of Robitussin.
I'm familiar.
Yeah, it gives you like a strobing effect. And
I've never done it, but I heard stories.
Yeah,
it's popular down here in Florida.
It is, yeah. It's popular everywhere. It's something kids can do, you know, go to the store and steal some Robitussin. And, you get
robo-tripping, baby.
Robo-tripping. So they gave me a really high dose, and it almost instantly after taking it, I laid down, I didn't feel good, and it just almost instantly popped me out of my body. And I kind of floated around the room and was seeing myself from different perspectives. And I could see the guides of the study, and I felt like I could see them from outside of my body, and I could hear them talking about me as if I wasn't in my body. And so it made my body feel very heavy, and then it felt like my consciousness floated out of my body. And then what happened was at night when I went home, I was having sleep paralysis. That night I went home and laid down, and in the middle of the night, you know, I lived in inner city Baltimore. It's pretty wild. And I heard somebody knocking at the door. I mean, it was the middle of the night. And I couldn't get up. I tried to get up, but instead something like my consciousness or something went down to the door, and I heard doop, 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 and I tried to get up, but my body wouldn't get up. This is a very common phenomenon, sleep paralysis.
Yeah.
And so I told them, because they call you the next morning like, hey, everything okay? And I was like, well, this thing happened. And they said, okay, let me have Roland call you back. And then he said, you know what, let's take a week off, just because that was kind of crazy. Yeah. And it had other really interesting effects too. It made my vision better. It has really strange effects. There's not a lot known about it. But they were doing psilocybin and DXM head to head.
And so you're saying, so what about the DXM is so similar to Robitussin?
That's the active ingredient.
That's the ingredient in Robitussin that causes the trip.
Yep. And you can buy it if you go to, I hate to say this, but if you're an adult and you want to try it, go to Amazon and you can buy pure DXM pills, as many as you want, for like a penny each.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
But don't do it, because I will say.
Do not do that, folks. Do not do that.
Don't do it, because at high Doses, it can put lesions on your brain and turn you into essentially a vegetable. It's dangerous. Don't do it.
Holy shit. Okay, so
But I was
psilocybin and DXM are the two drugs that you were given.
Yep.
But did they tell you before they gave you that?
No, it's double blind. So not even the people giving it to you know it. It's extremely strict. So they have the pharmacy come up and they have no idea what it's going to be. So they give you something and your guys
don't even know.
They don't even know. It's double blind. They have no idea.
What do you think the difference was between the DXM and the psilocybin?
A huge difference, because like I told you, I thought it was ketamine. You know, I had done different psychedelics before, and I thought this is ketamine because I fell down. I was on the bed, and I felt like I was going to go under surgery. I thought it was an anesthetic, and it's unlike psilocybin. I mean, you know, the psilocybin experiences there followed a very kind of typical archetype. DXM doesn't do that. You won't get a mystical experience off of DXM.
Okay.
It's more like ketamine.
And the DXM made your vision better, you said?
The next day, I felt like I've worn glasses my whole life since I was a little kid. I felt like my vision was so much clearer and so much better. If there's some link between that, I don't know. I haven't really looked into it, but they want to know, look, you have to write a report after every session. And so I put that in there and everything else, because there were a number of effects that I thought, this is really bizarre.
Yeah.
Like I just didn't even have my glasses on, and for a while I just didn't even wear them.
Really?
Yeah.
With the whole thing combined, was there any sort of change you noticed in yourself after the full experiment was completed? Like, was there any sort of different outlook or any sort of different insight that you took from it?
Well, it gave me an enormous amount of enthusiasm, which is what the drugs do. It gives you an enormous amount of enthusiasm, and the immediate thing that not everybody, but many, many people have is everybody else has to do this. Everybody. All we have to do is find a way to do it, and then you get religion, because that's immediately what I thought. So I was writing articles, this is what we have to do. Everybody must do it. This is going to fix everything. I believed all of that stuff.
Why did you believe that, though? Why do you think you believed that?
Because of the nature of the experience. The nature of the experience gave me the idea that the problems in the world didn't result from any external political things or structures in the world. It had to do with a level of spiritual immaturity, I guess maybe you could say. But that the basic idea, which I wrote in an article, was that whatever obstacles were in my way as far as success and doing the things that I wanted to do and to feeling better were internal, were features of my psychology that could be worked out through one of these processes, through these drugs. So I felt that I had achieved new insight into myself. And by achieving new insight into myself, I achieved new insight into the world. It gives you a completely different perspective. You might call a mythological perspective on the world. This is extremely common.
Yeah.
And so this is why when you have these experiences, you start reading stuff like Jung. You start reading stuff like McKenna, who was really kind of an acolyte of Jung, because you go, oh, this is a totally different way of looking at the world.
Right.
It's the left-hand path. It's the esoteric path. So yeah, I definitely felt different. I had an enormous amount of enthusiasm, and I immediately said, this must be what's behind religion.
What is that paper that you were citing that has never been released or is never going to see the light of day?
That was the religious studies.
That was the one with all the religious folks.
Yeah, let me tell you what happened. So Roland gets diagnosed with cancer. They're putting the finishing touches on this paper, which he believes is going to be the magnum opus, proving that psychedelics are the common core of all religions. What happened was a controversy happened at Johns Hopkins. His protege, Matthew Johnson, was accused of a whole bunch of stuff. Bullying, yelling at colleagues, bullying at colleagues. And when Roland was dying, he had to appoint a new director. Well, he naturally appointed Matt because he was his protege. He'd been working with him for 20 years. He personally groomed him to be his replacement. He puts Matt in charge of the Hopkins Psychedelic Research Center. Other people are mad, who basically are mad that he got the job and that are jealous, and that maybe they have some, I don't know what their resentments were, but they were mad about it and didn't want him to be the director, so they made up a bunch of stuff. Roland said, Matt, we got to let you go. And it created this massive controversy. And that controversy led to the New York Times expose called The Psychedelic Evangelist, which exposed everything that was happening behind the scenes. If that would not have happened, the paper would have been released. And we would have said, wow, they've proven that psychedelics are the common core of all religion. But because of this controversy that happened at Hopkins, all of these details, people started talking about what was going on. And they went, this is not what you think it is. Behind the scenes, this is a push to incorporate psychedelics into religion. They were taking clinical trial participants like me, paying them to go out and start religious organizations and try to recruit people into it.
Wow.
And this was being paid for by the heir to the UPS fortune. His name's T. Cody Swift. And he wasn't just funding it and funding all of these groups by clinical trial participants. He was also working on the study. So the funder of the study was working directly with the volunteers in the study.
Oh, wow.
And if you believe Matt Johnson, they were trying to shape their beliefs and saying, well, when you only rated the experience as a 4, could you bump it up? Wasn't it really a 5? Could you maybe bump it up a little bit? They were giving them spiritual literature to more and more try to convince them that this joined the movement. And so if you read that Times investigation, obviously these are major ethical transgressions. And so you start to get a picture of what really looks more like a religion than a scientific study.
Wow.
Right?
That's so crazy, man.
Yeah. The reason why this information hasn't gone very far is because you can see it's convoluted. People who are doing these things, they're not just going to come out and say, we're starting a new religion. Who wants to join? You see, it's extremely complex, and Bob Jesse was clear from the beginning of starting these studies, look, science is what has credibility these days. We have to push this through science. But he said in a lecture, it's inevitable that it'll turn into a new religion centered on psychedelics. So you've asked me before, but isn't that the good thing? I don't know. I'm simply saying it's happening. I don't know whether it's good or bad. Now, it is odd that the people that are demonizing the old religions are also starting their own.
That is odd, right?
Yeah. Some people have called it Scientology with drugs.
That's a funny way of putting it.
Yeah. A lot of this information came out because one of these organizations that they started called Legare, which is a Christian missionary organization, one of the people that worked for it, his name's Joe Welker. He became unsettled by what was happening, and he left the organization and leaked a bunch of emails and told what he knew and said, there's something going on here that people need to know about. And he published a series on Substack called the Psychedelic Religion of Johns Hopkins. I can't remember the title, but Brian was involved in that. And the interesting thing about that is all the stuff about Brian, a couple of weeks after it was published, all those parts disappeared. But I'd already printed them out.
What do you mean they disappeared?
They disappeared from the internet. They're no longer there. If you go look at it now, he doesn't mention him. But Substack has this nice feature that it's a newsletter service, meaning when you hit publish, it sends the email to your mailbox. So you have an original record of the original documents.
Wow. Yeah.
So I looked and I go, hold on, there's a bunch of pieces missing now. What happened? I went back to look at it. This is interesting. All of the references disappeared. So I went back to the original emails. A bunch of it had been deleted. Yeah. People don't want you talking about this. They do not want you, hence my little message over there.
Right.
They don't want you talking about it. And most people you can dismiss, but I did the trial. I know more about this than most people do. I've been studying it for 10 years really intensely, the scholarly literature. I not only did the clinical trial, and I've met most of these people and talked to them. So it wasn't so easy for them to dismiss me and say that, well, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, I do know what I'm talking about. I did the trial. You didn't. And it also came out, we should say that Roland himself was using psychedelics during these trials.
Right.
While he was studying them, he had also been taking them himself at his house, which he even admitted on the Tim Ferriss podcast, convinced him that it was true, that this must be true. All of these ideas are true. Perennialism, psychedelic theory of religion. You see?
The perennialism idea is very interesting.
It is, isn't it?
How, I think the way you described it, how, everyone speaks a different language, but the fundamental archetypal stories are all the same, just like like presented in different packaging.
Yes, and you know how they came to these conclusions. I'll give you a very, very short summary. The literature that they're reading, what happened, Danny, is people like Mircea Eliade and Jung, what they did is take all of this information on old mystery cults and old religions from all around the world, all the different pagan religions, all the different primitive religions, and they synthesized them. They took reports of mystical experiences from all over the world, they synthesized them into one generic and said, these are the basic features. These are the basic features of this mystical, religious, psychedelic experience. They synthesized them. Do you see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And then...
But they cherry-picked certain things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. What they're doing is using all of this literature on religions essentially to create a new religion that they believe is a universal religion. And the way that they've done that is by citing literature in which we know that those people, rather than providing accurate information about all these different religions, were leaving out the parts, and they said it themselves, the parts that don't fit and that don't share the common core, we just kind of push that to the side and take an eraser and take that off in order to create this universal religion, which they believe couldn't replace all of these other religions. You see? So what you see is the buildup to a new universal religion. And here's what I think your audience should impress upon them. You know, one of the books that has influenced them is a book called Global Mind Change by Willis Harman, who was at Stanford, one of the early psychedelic researchers. Much of this stuff was funded by the CIA. And
really?
Yes, he was an electrical engineer and a teacher at Stanford. And he was involved early on with psychedelic drugs, and he was a major enthusiast. Mm-hmm. Really interesting guy, really good guy. But he wrote a book called Global Mind Change. And so really, I think the worrisome part about this, because some aspects, like you say, but that kind of sounds good. Some of it is interesting. Some of it does sound good, but the scale is a serious problem. Anytime you're talking about a global mind change, I don't want that. I'm not interested in that. Change to what? What are we changing to?
Right.
Because everything is very vague. Well, Rick Doblin says we're all going to get spiritualized. What does that mean? What about if you don't want to get spiritualized?
Right.
So
I can see how I mean it's easy to see the goodness of it all. I mean, from an
good intentions,
from a good.
Well, you know, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? This is why Huxley said the price of liberty and freedom is eternal vigilance. You see, you can't just believe what I was taught early on. You don't allow institutions to self-define themselves, all of them. Or, name a corporation. Well, we're just trying to help. No, they're not. They're trying to make money.
Right.
That's what they're trying to do. And you got to also know that though they may have very good intentions, what about if there's things they're not thinking of? So when we all participate and we all give our part of the conversation, they may say, hey, we never thought of that. And then it becomes a more constructive thing rather than they're bad, they're evil, let's demonize them. I don't want to be a part of that. I want to illuminate the ideas that are driving them.
You're basically saying that what the goal behind that book, The Immortality Key by Brian Marescu, is to merge psychedelics with religion or with the church and to try to revive Christianity and Catholicism by infusing it with psychedelics and getting these people.
That's what he argues in the introduction. Yes, he said the premise is this. He says, look, the world is in chaos. The United States, we've got deaths of despair, opioid addiction. He paints a picture of Armageddon.
Yes,
and then like, let's say a medical ad. He says, we found the cure. Go to Roland Griffiths, they cut to Roland Griffiths at Johns Hopkins. He's discovered the origin of religion. He has a Johns Hopkins clinical trial participant saying, I was healed, there was this miraculous healing. And then he combines Roland's research with this search for the origins of religion, and then also adds in a bunch of psychedelic scientists who are interested in pushing this through the medical system. So it's essentially selling psychedelics as a cure for not just medical problems, depression, mental illness, but also the same old utopian stuff that Albert Hoffman and other people were pushing. Albert Hoffman was he's really kind of following Albert Hoffman. Albert Hoffman discovered LSD. Yeah, right. He's a chemist from Switzerland.
I'm familiar with him from The Road to Eleusis book.
Yeah, fascinating guy. And in that book, he had a rap that he did different variations on his rap, but he gave this kind of rap all the time. The world's coming doing it. He was what Jonathan Ott, who translated You know Jonathan Ott, psychedelic researcher?
Yeah, I'm familiar with him.
You should get him on here. But he
I think like a bunch of people have told us we need to get him.
Yeah,
on
I can't get his email address for the life of me, so I don't know how you get a hold of him. But he just popped up. There's a new lecture by him that's amazing. He's in Basel, actually, talking about Albert Hofmann. Anyway, Ott described Hofmann in this lecture as an ecological fanatic who didn't like people. He loved nature. He was very pagan. If you look at pictures of him, he owned this huge strip of land in the mountains of Switzerland, and he thought that industrial civilization was destroying the planet. And so he saw his drug as something that could resolve this. He thought it would revive the ancient mysteries and that it would magically, heal the world and fix the world by fixing the root of the problem, which he believed was human psychology. And so Murarescu, really, he's following in that tradition. And what he did is kind of dumb it down and turn it into a commercial sort of Hardy Boys mystery. If you overall, it's kind of like a drug advertisement.
It's like the Da Vinci Code for trying to uncover this ancient chemical evidence of the ergot fungus that's grown on wheat or barley that in these vessels that were found in Eleusis, right? To support his hypothesis that basically it's confirming and kind of building off of Ruck's Road to Eleusis with Hofmann and Wasson. Trying to just do a deeper dive on what the actual science is behind that. Can we evaluate? Can we confirm that they were mixing psychedelics with this wine that they were drinking and finding God this way? Which is fucking fascinating. I mean, it is fascinating.
It is. And all the work on ancient, what it is, think about it this way. The book, the story that most people have clung on to is essentially a literature review. It's taking Ruck's work and Wasson, The Road to Eleusis, and it's looking at updated research using the work of mainly Patrick McGovern, who's the author. He's at University of Pennsylvania. He's a chemist. He's the one who pioneered this study of finding little objects like this, scraping them for residue and chemically analyzing them.
Okay.
His work is the basis of the book. His books are Uncorking the Past, and his other book's called Ancient Wine. It's on Princeton University Press. Everybody should go out and buy it. You should have Patrick on. He's a fascinating dude. So Brian is writing this book. He tells Patrick what he's doing, and McGovern's mentioned in the book over 70 times. Right. It's largely based on the updating of Ruck stuff is mainly using two things: McGovern's work on ancient wine mixed with the work of Roland Griffiths. So you see, he combined all of these things together, right? But so the middle of it's like a literature review. It's bookended by an introduction and an outro that are really trying to sell Hopkins research and psychedelics as some kind of medical cure. He says, look, let's revive Eleusis. Let's turn it into this chain of mental health clinics let's get the government to pay for it. And it'll cure people of all these different diseases. That's what the book argues.
Now, is there any, and I can't remember from the book, but did we ever find any sort of hard evidence of psychedelics in these vessels? Or is there any hard evidence that there were psychedelics used in Eleusis?
No, there's none.
There's none.
None. Zero.
Other than the texts, like Hillman would claim and that Ruck would claim.
Yes.
Right, there's no hard evidence though.
None. And they would say, look, they would say it's a bias to demand this type of scientific evidence. That's what they say. This is a bias. We don't need that hard scientific evidence. There's just certain people who science has now become the standard of believability and evidence. And so people like McGovern and other people, I'm maybe biased in this way a little bit too. I kind of want evidence. But if you read these texts, and if you read about the ancient mystery cults, even reading like Walter Burkert, who rejects the drug hypothesis, and you even read the people who reject the drug hypothesis, and I mean, it does, if you look at the descriptions, it does seem like it's psychedelic drugs. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
But they want to take it a step further. Hey, is there any physical evidence? Yeah. Because you're finding these vessels all around the world, South America, here, there, Telluride, and Israel, and you're finding drugs everywhere. You're finding, Hillman was talking about, there was this, what was that vessel that he found that had human bodily fluids?
Oh, it was in Tampa, the University of Tampa. It was an Egyptian mug, the god of Bes or something like that. I
sent him that article, yeah.
Yeah, and they actually, they found like vaginal mucus in this mug.
Yes.
And when was that mug from, Stephen? Did they date it? I think they dated it in that article. Oh, here it is. That's the mug right there. That's the god of Bes. And go down, let's see when they say it was from.
5th century.
16th. Okay, the vessel is the shape of best played an important part of the cult as a way from the 16th century BCE to the 5th century CE. This particular example dates the Ptolemaic Roman period, from which the 3rd century BCE to the 3rd century CE, when the production of such objects peaked. And then go down to where it says what was actually found in it.
Here, I know
Psychoactive drugs, human blood, and other.
There you go. Yeah. They found evidence of human blood, bodily fluids such as oral or vaginal mucus, and breast milk.
Yeah, so morning, you had, I think Pogrom and Homeler is morning glory seeds, right? I think that's what it is.
Yeah. Traces, okay, sesame
So here you
seeds.
have scientific evidence of what Hillman's been talking about for a long time, right? That you have these strange concoctions that you find in these ancient medical books. Now you find a mug with it in it, and I'm sure this is going to keep happening. I think if you compare Hillman's work to the Immortality Key, you see something interesting.
Yes.
In Hillman's work, it's most people would find absolutely revolting, wild and crazy.
Disgusting.
And what you see in the Immortality Key, and I've talked with Hillman and all these Ruck and people about this, you see a kind of advertisement for a more modern new age sort of, wellness, Michael Pollanized, Oprah-fied wellness center that him and his associates are interested in making, apparently.
And in your Reason article, you claim that some of the people that Brian interviewed and used for the research behind the Immortality Key is people like Ruck or like Hillman. They were not. Brian did not explain to them his hypothesis or his
his hypothesis,
his motivation or his spin on the book.
They didn't know about a new Reformation. They didn't know about the pharmaceutical stuff. All they knew about was, look, I'm going to diligence Ruck's theory. Is it true or not? I'm going to go out and I'm going to look for evidence. And if there's no evidence, I'll say there's no evidence. If there is, I'm going to say there is. They didn't know about all of these other things. They didn't know about the new Reformation. And you can imagine Ruck and Hillman, with the way they are, whenever he found out what we're rebuilding the church, it was all the thrust of the psychedelic literature from Hoffman to McKenna. I mean, look at McKenna's stuff. He wrote, I sent you that.
McKenna was very anti-Christian.
All of them are. The whole point of psychedelics was to debunk Christianity and to dissolve it and get rid of it. After we debunk it, get rid of it. They want to destroy it.
And you can tell by talking to Hillman that he very much has a disdain for religion and Christianity.
Yes. So you can imagine his surprise whenever you open up the book, of which, as in his words, the Immortality Key is peppered with his research, and anybody who knows his research can read the book and see. He's only cited once. There's a short discussion of a paper
of Amen
that's called Smashing the Victorian Lens. It's probably his best paper, Hillman's best paper, Smashing the Victorian Lens.
I haven't even seen that one.
He talks about it in there for a paragraph or maybe two, but his research is much more prominent in the book than that would lead you to believe. The witches and all of this stuff. So yeah, they were definitely surprised. Right when the book came out, I had already known Ruck. I had already known all this literature.
Okay.
And Ruck introduced me to Brian through an email. And so I was like, oh, cool, new book coming out. This is going to be amazing. Maybe this stuff will become more popular. This is great.
Yeah.
And then when the book came out, I didn't read it at first, but Ruck and I wanted to interview them about it or talk to them about it. And they were like, kind of like, what?
You wanted to interview Ruck and Hillman about it?
Well, I wanted to talk to him about it. Hey, what's going on? Are you happy? Isn't this amazing? These subjects are getting out there. What do you think of the book? And they hem-hawed around about it. And about, where I expected to find jubilation, I found, I don't know.
That's interesting too, right? Like the foundational beliefs and values and ideologies of the people like Ruck and Hillman. It goes to even like biblical scholars. Like lots of biblical scholars are religious and believe and are Christian. And they're kind of like, they're going to school and studying this stuff, and it's supposed to be scientific, but they're also looking at stuff that only bolsters their beliefs they already have. And on the opposite side, you have people like Ruck and Amen, who are like very anti-Christian and anti-religious, but they're both looking at the same texts and both coming up with their own. Amen, to his credit, he says he's not trying to get to the intention of the author. He says that he's only trying to say what the texts say. Like he when I asked him about it, he's like, no, I don't care what the intention of the author was. I don't care what their ideas were. All I want to understand is what the texts say and what the context of it was.
Yeah, the context is what really matters. And I want to be careful about painting with a broad brush of saying, well, Ruck and Hillman are anti-Christian. It does sound like that.
There obviously is a whole group of classical scholars that are anti-Christian.
Yeah, and Ruck, I don't know if Carl would say he's maybe he would. I don't know. You could ask him, but I don't. But yeah, it's there. With Hillman, let me just say this. With Hillman, it's much more overt. He's very clear about his motivations and how he feels about modern Christianity and the Catholic Church. I mean, he wrote a book on the Catholic Church called Ritual Child Rape. I mean, come on.
Right.
So when you have that's what's motivated the literature. Then you have the Immortality Key come out, and it's, hey, let's, and then he's meeting with the Pope and handing him the book. This is extraordinary. Yeah, and so what you see is this playing out in real life, that you see psychedelics being deployed I think I sent you those 2 articles. And the New Yorker had one article, then the Ryan Grimm at The Intercept had a really interesting article that was called Ibogaine versus meth. And on the Russian side of the Ukraine war, they're all loaded on meth. On the Ukraine side, they're all taking Ibogaine, which is a very powerful psychedelic. And he was chronicling this drug.
Right now?
Yes. Yes, and the New Yorker article is about the same thing, because they believe that psychedelics increase.
Steven, pull this up, bro.
Yeah, put Intercept Ibogaine and it'll pull up. It's amazing.
What?
They believe that it increases.
All the Russians are on meth?
Read the
article. Casualties are way higher on the Russian side.
Well, and that's normal though, because Syria they were all on meth.
Well, the Nazis were on meth
and the Nazis
too,
were all on meth.
Yeah.
Well, you got to keep them going,
Right. And so were the Pearl Harbor, the kamikazes.
Go down a little bit to where the real article's at. There it is.
There you go.
Right
Steve,
down there. There it is.
Oh, this is it? Okay.
Oh, it's behind a paywall.
No, it's not. You just got to close that. Right? Enter your email. Just enter your email.
Ukrainian military is experimenting with Ibogaine, a psychedelic drug banned in the U.S. Now, this is fascinating. Do you see this? To do so, it is partnering with founder of the Yippie movement, Irvin Dana Beale. Now, he got thrown in prison.
Okay, scroll up. Hang on, scroll up real quick.
Yeah.
Okay, let me see the headline. The Ukrainian military is experimenting with psychedelic drug Ibogaine to treat traumatic brain injury. Okay, Ukraine is working with the founder of the Yippie movement to provide Ibogaine to soldiers on and off the battlefield. Scroll down. Okay, what were you pointing out?
Well, to promote battle readiness. They said it increases spiritual resilience, so that it kind of puts you in this heightened.
Ibogaine's most famous American patient may well be Hunter Biden, who has battled his own drug addiction with help of Ibogaine treatment at a Mexican clinic. At low doses, Beale, whatever, how you spell that.
You got to get it. You should get it. It's Dana Beale. You should get him on here. I have his phone
Beale?
number.
Oh,
He's
really?
He's an old-timey Yippie guy, so they were like anti-war, hippie, like Abby Hoffman types. And he is convinced, he's a big marijuana activist who's been to prison a dozen times over this, but he's the one. Rick Doblin got him the Ibogaine, and he brought it in, because it's illegal, and he brought it into Ukraine and provided it to the military. And when he got back, he was bringing marijuana somewhere in Oregon and got thrown in prison. And I contacted him after I read this article, and I wanted to ask him details about this to write an article. And about 2 weeks later, the phone rang from a prison, and it was him. And he's a wild dude.
Is he in prison right now?
No, I think he's out.
Where is this guy?
I think he's in New York. I'll give you his phone number.
I got to get him here now.
Oh, he's an interesting guy.
Wow.
Yeah, so they're using this and if you look at the New Yorker article on the same thing, they think that, you remember Terence McKenna's stoned ape theory?
Of course.
Okay, you know how he said, okay, maybe it part of the theory is that it increases hand-eye coordination, it makes you a better hunter.
Edge detection.
Edge detection, all of these attributes. Well, who do you think's interested in that?
Oh,
the military.
God, yeah.
So what I'm trying to report on is that we're in this utopian mindset. Oh, psychedelics, they'll do all these things, but they're always going to be used for the opposite thing too, and we need to be prepared. Aldous Huxley says in Brave New World, the cost of liberty is eternal. The price of liberty and freedom is eternal vigilance. And so I've always took that to heart. You need to be vigilant. Don't get caught up in the sales promotion. Oh, we're all going to heal each other, and then there'll be a utopian cult, and all war will end. Bull.
Right.
This is what's really happening. Is it all bad? Is this a condemnation of the whole movement? No. There are legitimate medical aspects, but we should also be asking, what else are they going to be used for? one reason is just because it's interesting, right?
Yeah.
I never thought about using this on the battlefield, but there's a new article out called, it's on some religious website, and it's called "Do Psychedelics Fix a Broken Brain" or something. And it's about, part of it's about John Lubecki, who's an Iraq War veteran, and he's talking about using MDMA, and he said, I'm on the front lines, but he's an American GI who went over to Ukraine to try to help him because he hates the Russians and believes in this war. And he said a lot of the people, they have trouble sleeping because they have PTSD, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, man, I'm over here on the front line sleeping like a baby because I've been healed through psychedelics.
Wow.
Yeah. So they have this usefulness, and if you think about it overall, this is really could lead to an intensification of war, because during the Iraq War, you can look up these numbers. There was a lot of articles during the Iraq War of how much Prozac and antidepressants they were sending to the front line, because my brother was over there a long time. They kept extending your service date. Well, you'll go home in September. Well, now it's going to be March. Well, actually, it's going to be the summer. And people are naturally depressed because it was horrible, because of all the things that were happening. So now they're thinking, well, that's SSRIs. Those didn't work that good. What about if we can send them over there? You can extend the length of time to which they're there. You don't have to worry about shell shock. So it's what one member of the military, and this, you can find this too, he called it, we need to have sophisticated understanding of psychedelics on the battlefield to get a leg up on the enemy, because it results in what he called increased lethality. It makes the fighting force more lethal. So what you see is, I was joking.
How would it make him more lethal if you're...
All of the things I just told you. Increase in hand-eye coordination, edge detection. If you're in the jungle or in the desert, this is an advantage.
Right, so but there would have to be like a very fine line you can't cross, right? If you're taking psychedelics, to where you don't want to be like tripping too hard.
That's why they're spending millions of dollars
on micro dosing or something.
The government and DARPA's dumping $50-60 million into this. Of what we know, they're dumping hundreds of millions of dollars into this. In order
type in DARPA and psychedelics, see what comes up.
In 2020, they put $23 million into it. That's in a Nature article, which is a very prestigious journal.
In 2020, they put $23 million.
$23 million, so you know it's more than that now.
DARPA is exploring ways to remove hallucinatory side effects from psychedelic medicines while retaining their therapeutic benefits.
Now, do you see this? DARPA's granted $27 million to UNC Chapel Hill. I think that's David Nichols, the chemist David Nichols, who made a lot of the psilocybin for Hopkins and made all of the MDMA for the MAPS trials. He makes a lot of these drugs, and he works for DARPA. Yeah, you should have him on too. He's from Kentucky. He's another part of
What's his name?
Dave Nichols, Nichols. Yeah, really interesting guy. Knows a ton. He's a chemist, and his son also does this, and he speaks up a lot, and he knows a ton all about the chemistry side and everything else. I think he knew Albert Hoffman. He knows.
Yeah, why wouldn't DARPA and the military, like, that's such a silly thing to overlook. Why wouldn't they be fucking dropping millions of dollars into this stuff? If you can chemically enhance cognition and effectiveness on the battlefield with drugs, why the wouldn't you spend a ton of money on it?
If these things provide general optimization, of course you're going to want it for the military.
Right.
What about if what about if the Russians get it, or the jihad gets it, and they're all hyped up on ibogaine and we don't have any? Well, they might get us,
Right.
So it's moving in all kinds but imagine this is now when our understanding of it's very primitive. What about when the science keeps developing? Because they've got, our best people are working on taking the trip out. Our best people are working on amplifying the good effects, getting rid of the bad effects. So we're moving in. Shayla Love wrote an article, psychedelic journalist. She's at the Atlantic now, I think. She wrote an article called "The Psychedelic Drugs of the Future Are Ones You've Never Even Heard of." At some point, this stuff we think of is going to be looked at as primitive. They're building novel compounds all the time that who knows what they might do. But you can see a Brave New World type scenario developing. It could go one way or it could go the other, and very likely, like all other things, it'll be a mixture of good and bad.
Right. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
But I think it's important to bring this up, not as a scare tactic, but simply to say, look, you may need to balance out or temper all of this utopian thinking with the realization that there are other things happening. Because a lot of, there's just too much. The coverage of psychedelic research has been extremely bad. You
Yeah.
can't just say,
That's
I'm
the
only
one
listening
thing.
to the people who say what I like.
Right,
The
right.
other people I'll ignore.
Sure, but-
What you have to believe in is a conspiracy amongst academia, which Graham Hancock and other people's push, which is absurd. There is no
It's
conspiracy.
not that absurd.
Yes, it is.
I don't think it's that absurd because I haven't had Graham Hancock on here, but I don't know if you're familiar with the debate he did with Flint Dibble.
Yeah, that was great. He got Hancock was demolished.
I agree with you. But I also had Dibble in here.
Yeah.
And he specializes in Athens and archaeology in Athens,
Sure.
and he has a little bit of classical Greek in his background, and we were talking about Atlantis, and he perfectly systematically dismantled the Atlantis theory for me. Made perfect sense. Wow. I was completely on board with him.
Yeah.
I thought it made perfect sense as well when he was debating Graham on his Lost Ancient Civilization.
That was ugly.
Although he did get a lot of shit wrong in that debate. There was some shit that where Flint
he probably did.
It with 250,000 ships. There's a
I
million
remember
ships.
this. Yeah, there was
that was way the fuck off.
It doesn't matter because he was absolutely demolished. And Graham Hancock's, if you look at the implications of it, what Hancock said is, I believe all this stuff, but I don't have any proof, but you don't have any proof that it's not true. No. The burden of proof is on the believer. I don't get to say, there's a teapot in the sky and it's there, but nobody else can see it. You got to prove me wrong. Not the way it works. If you make claims, you have to prove them, and Hancock can't prove anything he says because he made it up, because he's a fantasy writer. The books that Hancock writes are in a long tradition of Victorian literature of the same
Right.
UFOs mixed with mystery cults.
Yeah.
He's building on Eric von Daniken. You know his stuff?
I know Eric von Daniken. Yeah.
Yeah,
But so again, there are things in that podcast where Flint acts like what he does is clever, right? He got 90% of it spot on. I agree with him on it. But there were, to be fair, there were points in that podcast where he took things and said it as if it was gospel when he was completely wrong about it, right?
But that doesn't make Hancock right. He's still
no, you're right. It doesn't make Hancock right.
No, but I don't know enough about these topics in order to say he got it wrong, but I totally believe that he was wrong probably on multiple things.
So I think there's a psychological thing that happens with people like Flint who have spent their entire lives, as well, him and his father and probably his grandfather, who knows, who in archaeology, in the academic part of this stuff, drinking and eating the gruel, sludging through the mud, doing all the boring, reading all the boring, and then next thing you know, you're 40 years old. No one knows who the you are, and you've been in the mud doing this archaeology your whole life. Then you have people like Graham Hancock who go on Joe Rogan, they make documentaries, they write all these books, they're making millions of dollars. Everybody knows who they are, and you're a Flint Dibble. Nobody knows you from Adam.
Exactly.
Right?
So you're saying he's bitter?
He's bitter.
I'm sure there's something to that.
Yes.
But to us,
I'm not giving him a pass. I'm not giving Graham a pass because of that. I'm just saying you have to understand the whole dynamic of this thing.
I know all that, and they do want to police their borders, as you say. Look, what do you know? Get out of our business. This is our zone.
Right. Exactly.
And they do want journalists who are going to pay deference to them and say, look, well, they're right about everything. But it still doesn't change the fact that Hancock is completely full of shit and that he knows it. He's a wind-up merchant.
I think he believes a lot of the stuff he says.
He might.
I think that there's legitimate questions in some of the stuff. And also, Flint gave him credit. He goes, a lot of the people I know in archaeology that are legit archaeologists, they only got into archaeology because of Graham. Because of Graham. I think it's the same thing with Hillman. I think the shit that Hillman says, I think he's inspiring people to fucking prove him wrong and to learn Greek and to read these ancient languages and revive this shit.
I think there's something to that.
But so in that Flint podcast, like he was really I was following him and I was agreeing with him, and he was really laying it out in a very cohesive manner with all the stuff about Greek and Atlantis and how it's probably completely and going back to Eric von Daniken. But then I showed him these things. These ancient I don't know if you're familiar with these. These are like dynastic Egyptian. That's a 3D print of an Egyptian vase that was, according to the academics and the Egyptologists, was created around the same time as the dynastic Egyptians, which was about 4,500 to 5,000 years ago. When they only had copper chisels and pounding stones to create things, right? And there's even depictions. There's depictions, drawings and stuff on caves and tablets where they show how they made these. And they show them like going like this on wheels and stuff. But this guy who lives down the street from here, Matt Bell. Yeah, here they are. That's how the Egyptologists believe that these were made, right? So these are made out of granite, some of the hardest, like rose granite and red granite, right? Some of the hardest stones on Earth. And he had these measured at a laser light scanner thing at some big aerospace company. And this vessel is the ones that he purchased, the real ones from ancient Egypt, are perfectly symmetrical within like 1/1000th of a human hair. Impossible. It would have had to have been made on a CNC machine today,
right?
Like on a computer, and it's impossible. Like, how the fuck did they make these? And these handles are made out of granite. And I asked Flint this, and like he creates this. It's like this, to me. It's like a cop out where he says, "Oh, it's people like him." Don't deserve to talk about this stuff or question this stuff because he's buying these vessels that are contributing to cartels that are selling them, and it's this underground black market. I don't want to be associated. I don't even want to be in the same room with one of these ancient relics.
This is what Dibble told you?
This is what Dibble told me. And it's the same thing he's doing with Graham, trying to call him a Nazi.
Yeah, I see. Would be my criticism of Dibble, is whenever he turned it into a personal attack, that he's Nazi white supremacy. Now, look, he said that he didn't do that, and I don't know, and I'm not interested enough to go and look into it. But I think he was saying, because of some of this Victorian literature has this romantic, noble, savage type of thing, and there's racism in it, that makes him racist. I do not believe for a second that Graham Hancock is racist.
Right.
Sorry, I don't.
Right.
Do I think he's full of shit? Yes. Is Dibble 100% right? No. And is he kind of have an annoying personality? Yes. I can see why people don't like him. It is an annoying personality of this guy, Graham Hancock's got this cool thing going. It's kind of interesting. And Dibble, well, you're wrong. And nah. Yeah, that's kind of annoying. It is kind of annoying. Yeah. But it doesn't change.
And when people come in here and they're unwilling or unable to say the words, I don't know, it's always
It's a red flag. Yeah. It's a red flag.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a red flag.
So going back to Hillman and Ruck. So, I mean, these guys, you're saying just because Hillman and Ruck believe that drugs were everywhere in antiquity and probably had something to do with Christianity.
No, well, go ahead. Sorry.
You interviewed a lot of people who think otherwise, right? I mean,
well, you have to.
You have to, right? And most of these people that are saying otherwise are in universities and have
some of them.
They're professors of religious studies.
Some of them.
Okay.
But you got to take this on a case by case basis because when you're creating a conspiracy theory, you like things that are very vague. So they say, well, this academia. My experience has been totally different. Every single person I've contacted, from Patrick McGovern to Jan Bremer, Bart Ehrman, name it. Dozens and dozens of scholars over the year. Ann Taves, Hugh Urban. All kinds of people who study these things. Everyone that I've reached out to, they're like, hey, how's it going? Sure, you can ask me questions. These people have no reason to talk to me. Why would, they're always will. Everybody that I've talked to has been totally willing to answer what were probably stupid, uninformed questions from me, and were totally nice. I never sensed there was any conspiracy at all, but they're working in a discipline in which you lead with evidence and then come up with theories. You don't come up with a theory and then look for evidence. And I'm not, but let's be clear, I'm not accusing Hillman or Ruck of doing this. Carl Ruck has made an enormous contribution to the humanities. Without him, as Chris Bennett told me, you wouldn't be able to write a PhD thesis on these things. He is a pioneer in this, and what he's done is enormously creative. But nobody's going to be right. Everybody now that may seem right in 50 years, a bunch of it will probably be wrong. As Richard Knowles says of this type of scholarship, we wash each other's diapers. They'll contribute a little bit, then the next generation, that was a bunch of shit. You wash it off and you start again. It's a long process. What you have to be careful for is when people combine these things with political and theological agendas. I don't care that Graham Hancock's made a bunch of money. Great, wonderful. He's very industrious. Yeah. He's very creative. There's a lot of good things you could say about him, but I do think that he's taken his readers on a ride. But so what? I mean, they're fantasy books. Where you have a problem is a lot of these people think that it's real. But unlike Dibble, I don't think there's some nefarious thing with Graham Hancock, like, oh, he has some secret agenda. I don't believe any of that. Personally, that's just my opinion.
Yeah.
No. I think they're good fantasy books, like Von Daniken. Von Daniken stuff, I just did Magicians of the Gods or something, same thing. I saw you got Jason Giordani. This is a genre of books that take aliens and mystery cults, and there are tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of them. Yeah. You go to Inner Traditions, Bear and Company, These books are unlimited. It's the same elements reworked, and they're pretty much all the same, and they make the same claims.